Welcome everyone to a special edition of Drunk Agile. With us as always is the star of the show in the background there. Nisha, you have your eyes open. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And her minion is
Prateek Singh.
And we're really excited about this episode because Prateek and I were talking and we're like, we need to get one of the giants of Agile, somebody who's thinking on this stuff people will listen to and they will actually come and watch our episode for. Well, that guy wasn't available, so we got Karl Scotland instead.
Yeah, so you asked me if I could recommend anyone.
Yeah. So, Karl, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you. Thanks you for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
I was going to say thanks for lowering your standards, and so it's guests' privilege here. What can you introduce us to what you're drinking tonight?
I am drinking. So I have a bottle of Tamnavulin. So it's a Speyside single malt double cask. Matured in American oak, but we'll forgive that with sherry cask finish. What do you like to talk about percentage, don't you? 40%.
40, distiller's edition. That's okay.
Cheers.
Prateek, you?
Oh, I have a concoction that Dan you just brought over for me. Cask strength, 58%, bourbon cask. So
bugs included.
Bugs included, just like Dan's code.
And I have a Blair Athol. It's an 11-year-old. This was another one that I filled straight from the cask, 55.8%. So a little low, even though it's young. It's only 11-year, but this is a wine finish, I think, but it doesn't really say here. But I'm pretty sure based on the color that it's a wine finish. So cheers, Karl. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, great. I should say I was thinking of making myself a Negroni in honor of Dan looking like Stanley Tucci and his Negroni and the Italian influence, but I ran out of Campari at the weekend, so.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, I broke the internet when I shared that video of me making Negroni. Yeah. Karl, what are we talking about? What are
we talking about?
You get to.
Yeah, so we had a bit of back and forth on Twitter, so I kind of want to start there, which is I think I posted something along the lines of if throughput is a measure of productivity and lead time, deliberately said lead time is a measure of responsiveness, what would you describe, what would you use for a measure of predictability? Yeah, and you kind of came back at me at that one. So I want to follow that one up.
I don't know, Prateek, you want to go first before I give them both barrels? Or
No, let's go. Like Nisha hid. For those of you, Nisha's already hiding. She's like,
I don't want anything to do with this.
So fundamentally, I mean, the thing is, so number one is Twitter, right? So it's, how do you have an argument when 280, is it 280 characters now? 280 characters or less?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know how you do that.
As evidenced by the internet, you can have a very effective argument.
Yeah, I'm always right. My problem isn't with the characterization. My problem is that both of those things are too narrowly defined. Saying that lead time is a measure of responsiveness, like I said, I think that's too narrowly defined. Saying that throughput is a measure of productivity, I think that's too narrowly defined. Can those be used for those circumstances? Probably, yeah. But I mean, that wouldn't be the first place that I would go, and I think that was my response. That's not the first thing I would think about with those things. Can they be? But I wouldn't go into somebody and say, and I don't know if you were saying this. I'm just going to put words in your mouth so we can maybe have some banter here. I would never say somebody that lead time's only a measure of responsiveness. You see what I'm saying?
So let me kind of set a bit of context then. So I'm kind of thinking about when I go into organizations and they want to know, well, the classic question that got asked was, is like, how do we know whether this agile stuff's working? Like, we could measure like how long your stand-ups are and, whether who turns up, how long your sprint retrospectives are. So for me, it's about things like, is the organization becoming more productive? So you're talking to execs and leaders and stuff, that's the sort of language they understand. And then how might we measure productivity? Well, productivity, usually for them, productivity is the number of, the amount of code we're releasing. Now, how do you define that? But the amount of work that is getting delivered by our teams. And that's kind of what throughput is. I think throughput's pretty close. Yeah, it's more than that. But in terms of saying, are our teams delivering more value to the market, to our customers, I think throughput's a pretty good measure. And then similarly, the responsiveness one is just like, how quickly can we deliver? When we say we're going to do something, how quickly can we do that? How responsive can we be to the market? Then lead time gives you that. Yeah, there's probably other ways of doing it, and actually some of that the value, I think, is the conversation around, well, what is throughput and what are we measuring? But I kind of find flow metrics give us some pretty good ways of, and because it's so easy to measure that, you can get some quick wins really soon.
Yeah, Prateek, your turn.
Well, I was actually more interested in the second part of the question than the first, which I think Dan's kind of covered already here. And both of you have that throughput and cycle time should be more broadly defined, and there's certain ways to look at it. But what is a measure of predictability was the part that I was more interested in.
Yeah, that's the interesting bit, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because your argument, I think, was you're either predictive or you're not.
This is my current thinking, my current hypothesis. I don't know what more predictable means, but we can talk about
yeah that. So I've had some, because it kind of got me thinking about it, because on the one hand I get that you look at Shewhart and all that, and all the maths behind it, and yeah, you're either stable and predictable or you're not. But I think if you went to an exec, and so one, again, I had those conversations, if I say, would you like to be more predictable, that's meaningful to them. And I think it is a meaningful thing to be able to say. And what I mean by that is you get more stuff when you expect to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two ways of looking at it. I think one is let's take single item. You look at your 80th percentile and you kind of go, well, that's what you're going to get. That's and you are therefore predictable because that's what the data is telling you. But I think there's something to do with the variability within that data set that looks at how predictable you are. Because the simple example I use, if I'm delivering some stuff in one day, and my 80th percentile is 100 days, and I say, oh, we're predictable, you'll get it within 100 days, and then suddenly they get it in a day, you can't plan around that. Whereas if you've got between 1 and 10 days, that's that feels more predictable to me. So what is that? This is kind of why my math starts letting me down. What do you call that? How do you calculate that variability to kind of put some sort of number on it that you could show that you are reducing variability to the point where you're now more predictable?
Yeah, and this is where so I'm really glad you brought this up, because I think Prateek and I've talked about this. I think we're going to probably do a whole series of Drunk Agile on kind of exactly what you're talking about there, Karl. I'm especially excited because you brought up Shewhart, because my answer would be coming at it from a Shewhart perspective. And Shewhart had this idea of there's the voice of the process, which is the data, and then there's the voice of the customer, which is an executive, like you're saying, an executive saying, hey, I want this, I want this, I want this. The problem is, generally speaking, the voice of the customer is arbitrary, for lack of a better word. It's fairly arbitrary. There are certain situations where maybe there are regulatory requirements that need to be done, or maybe you have a contract signed you need to get. But by and large, in product development, the voice of the customer is arbitrary. Whereas the voice of the customer, Shewhart would say, you can look at a set of data coming off of your process, and you can tell whether that process is predictable or not. And the way that Shewhart defined it was, is it within certain limits, right? Right. And we don't have to get into, control charts and calculating those limits. Maybe I don't know if we have to get into that or not. And so if an executive came to me and said, how do I get more predictable? The first thing that I would do, and I assume this is what Shewhart would do, is look at their data and say, hey, is there any signal in this data? Because if there is signal in this data, the way that you get more predictable is you eliminate that signal, right? The stuff that is quote unquote, out of control. If there is no signal in this data, then by definition, that process is predictable, and if you want to improve it, your only option is to make a substantial change to the process itself. That's really your only option if you want to quote unquote improve it. Now, sorry, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Oh, well, no, I was kind of thinking. So voice customer, voice data. Kind of, I think that's a really useful distinction. And I think maybe when we're talking about are we becoming more predictable, we're saying more predictable from the customer's perspective rather than from the data's perspective.
Yes.
And that's I guess that's my. So just having that distinction, I think, is useful because, yeah, I agree. You look at the data says you are this predictable.
Right.
I still think it's meaningful from the customer to be able to understand, how useful that predictability is.
Yes. Yeah. Where dissonance comes in is when those two things are out of whack, right? When the customer has this expectation, but the data, what we're saying is your system is only capable of this. I know you want it, like you said, I know you want it in 10 days. I know that's what you want, but our system is only capable of 100 days. That's just what we're capable of.
When I say more predictable, I don't mean getting stuff when you want it. I mean things like, so this I guess predictability there's two sides to it. One is I get stuff late, and typically that's where lack of predictability shows up, because we think it's going to take 10 days and it takes us 100 days. But the flip side of that is we're now expecting it to take 100 days and it takes 10 days. So that, to me, that's still not predictable, because I can't plan around that. It's like, do I plan my marketing campaign for 100 days time, and suddenly now I could have planned that marketing campaign 10 days earlier. And to me, that's where that reducing the variability, and it's almost kind of like, so one idea is like, could you look at the gap between the 50th percentile and the 80th percentile? And if that gap is smaller, then you're more predictable in air quotes.
Go ahead, Prateek, because Prateek and I spent a lot of time on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with doubling down on the signal versus noise thing. I think and even Karl, when you say reducing the variability, what you're really saying in classical terms is, how do we get the signal out of here? How do we bring that 85th down or 80th down so that the signal, as we remove the signal, that comes down? Mm-hmm. The second part of it, because we would go all the way back when we were initially talking about it, was one of the things, Karl, that you said was, I can look at my data, and Dan, you just said it too, and say, this is how long it will take me to get something done. But as soon as we say that, there are so many assumptions built into it to say we're actually operating something that's stable enough that we can trust that prediction. That first part is table stakes. If we are operating a system where those cycle times keep growing over time, you cannot use your data to predict how long it will take us to get something done. So table stakes to this is running a stable system where those cycle times are not changing much. Second part of it is getting rid of signal.
Yeah.
So if I can jump, can I jump in, Karl? Because I thought you made it. God, I hate I can say this, because you made a good point there, right? When the customer comes back and says, "Hey, if your cycle time is somewhere between 1 and 100, I can't plan for that," right? And that is pain that the customer is feeling, and that's absolutely true. I mean, that's true. They can't. But again, that to me, that's more voice of the customer rather than voice of the process. And if your process is telling you it's between 1 and 100. It's obviously, as we all know, it'd be very, very dangerous to try and plan on 10 days if the process is 100 days. If the customer really wants 10 days, now we got to talk about, like I was saying before, now we got to talk about what are fundamental changes to the process that we need to make to be able to get it in that 10-day range, which is what our customer is expecting. Maybe we get there, maybe we don't. And my point is, does that mean we've become more predictable? I have a hard time saying that we've become more predictable, because we've fundamentally changed, how we do stuff. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and maybe we're just maybe we're going to get into semantics about the word predictable, and we find a different word. But I look at things like so when we're talking about right sizing features, right? The reason we right size features and we recommend making features smaller, I think that's partly around reducing that variability of the size of work. Mm-hmm. Because that, to me, that improves predictability. We know we're never going to get it so that every work item is exactly the same. So you're never going to get to that point where you say every single work item we finish takes 5 days. To me, that's 100% predictable, because every work takes exactly 5 days. From my definition of predictability, what I mean by predictable, and versus that kind of 1 to 100 days. So yeah, so two things. One, you're never going to get that. So it's always degrees, and I would never set a target. To me, it's are we moving in the right direction? So in the same way, we want to say, we would like to say our throughput increasing. But we're not going to set a target. We would like to see our lead time getting shorter, but we're not going to set a target. We would like that variability to come down as well. And that variability is, to me, that's just at the moment, I haven't found a better word than, to me, that's what I mean by, or in terms of the language I'm talking to customers understand is predictability.
Yeah, and see, to me now what you just said there is much more in line, based on my understanding, based on my interpretation, much more in line with how Deming talks about stuff. He's like, yeah, you don't set a target, you don't look at outcomes. What you do is you focus on the process that produced the outcome, and you focus on continually improving the process that produced that outcome.
Yeah,
and that was kind of how his approach. And so he never really talked about more predictable or less predictable. He just talked about continual improvement. That's all he really talked about.
Right. And when you look at aging WIP as a metric, that focusing on that as a metric and understanding which of your work items are getting older is pretty much focused on reducing that variability, because the older things get, the older they're going to get, and therefore the wider that variability is going to become. Yeah.
I mean, if I guess the word I would use, it's controlling variability when you can control it, so that you know when you've got variability that's uncontrolled. I mean, I know that you're right. That is semantic, and that's semantic and pedantic, right? But that's, I don't know if we need to get to that level of nitpicking for understanding. I don't know. I don't know. Prateek.
No, I don't think so. I think it's still, I mean, it's removing the noise in the system to some extent. So there's a bit of both in there.
It's separating the external causes from internal causes too.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. Predictability for me is, are we controlling, to your point, because there will always be variability. There will always be variability in the process. We totally agree on that. But have we controlled, when we look at that variability, have we controlled the variability that we can, so that we can see the signal of uncontrolled variability when it's there? And that's, I think you're right. I think we do need a different word than predictability. Because I think most people do think about predictability the way that you do. They think about predictability in terms of determinism, right? Deterministic thinking. I know with 100% certainty that this is going to happen.
I guess the word we could is, I guess it's more confidence than predictability, isn't it?
I like confidence.
If you've got kind of no predictability, then you have no confidence in the plans. And what you want is to be able to plan with increased confidence.
Yes. Yeah. Is the data that we have, is that a reliable predictor of the future that we're trying to forecast? Yeah, that's pretty much all we can say. Prateek, I know I'm cutting you out.
No, that's why I was taking it back to the whole stable system thing of that's the table stakes. If you don't have that, you cannot rely on your data. And the second thing I wanted to add was it's also, we have been talking about cycle time and lead time as whether that is becoming more predictable or having less variability. We should really be having that same conversation with throughput. You want your throughput to be relatively, and Nisha's extra talkative today. If you ever
she's agreeing with me.
Yeah. You want your throughput to be in that range too. You want your throughput to have lower variability as well, because you don't want, like, I get 10 things done one day, and then for the next 15 days, I get 0 things done.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I guess that's flow, isn't it? Yeah, if you're kind of getting a small number of things done frequently, that gives you a more predictable system, or you have more confidence in that. Than if you're doing nothing and then suddenly you kind of chuck out a batch.
Yeah.
So going back to the idea of the difference between, and let's talk it like the 50th and 80th percentile, just to pick some random thing out. What would you call that as a measure? Or is there something?
You're talking about the variance in the data,
Yeah. So one way I talk about it, I guess, just to try and help people understand what I'm trying to get at, is look at your 50th percentile line, look at your, let's say, 90th percentile line. If that's a huge gap, to me, that means you're less predictable. You can have lower confidence in your plans. But if your 50th percentile line and your 90th percentile line are quite close together, then there's less variability in that, basically in the range of cycle times that you've got, assuming we're looking at the percentiles on a cycle time scatter chart.
I don't know if I necessarily disagree with that. I come at it from a slightly different perspective, because I think about action, right? Because to me the whole point of data is for action, and so whether that gap is big or small, to me is a less interesting question than is there a signal in the data that we need to be taking action on? And
but that is the signal, isn't it? So if I look at it and there's a big gap in there, then the action we can take is, let's look at those things that are taking a long time and see, is there anything we can do with those things? What can we learn from that? Or is that just the nature of the work? I mean, maybe there's nothing we can do about it.
This is brilliant. Prateek, were you going to say something? Because I was going to say something to that, but you want to say, you jump in, you go ahead. Right.
What I was going to say was, I would, regardless of the distance between the 50th and the 90th, or whatever that is, I would always prompt action on those kind of outliers. And I guess this is where you're going with it, Karl, is over time, they should get closer to each other because you're prompting action on the outliers. The part that I'm kind of struggling with is, I don't know if I'm going to wait. I'm going to look at that distance to prompt those actions.
Yeah, the way that I would understand Stuart would talk about this is there are two types of action, and so therefore there are two types of mistakes. Deming talked more about the two types of mistakes. There's the, attributing a cause to exceptional variation when it's routine, and then the opposite of that, attributing something to routine variation when it's exceptional. And that's what I would say is, if we look at those distances between, say, the 50th and the 85th percentile, the first thing I would want to know is, number one, is there signal in there? Is there signal? Because that's going to inform the action. If there's signal, then we need to look for an assignable cause. Stuart would say there's a predominant effect that is acting on the system right now, and we need to find that predominant or that dominant effect and get rid of it before we do anything else. That's what we need to do, so as to minimize those mistakes that I was just talking about. If there is no dominant effect, then our only option, if it is a goal, and that's what I'm saying, I don't know that Stuart would ever say it's a goal to get those percentiles closer together. To me, that's kind of a customer type of thing. But if that's our process aim, then the only way to achieve that is to fundamentally change the process, if that's what we want.
But yeah, and if we're, so I'm looking at this from an agile transformation perspective. That's basically what we're doing, is we're changing the process. But I want to have that process changes driven by the data, and have some data that shows that those process changes are having a positive impact, rather than just kind of dive in with best practice.
Right.
So we can look at that and we kind of go, hey, look, this is interesting. You've got some features that are taking 100 days and some features that are taking 10 days. Is that something? So one, are there any kind of special causes in there? Anything, and usually the first thing is like, oh yeah, those are just old Jira items that have never been updated.
Right.
Like, well, let's get rid of those to start off with.
Exactly.
So now, again, that improves the predictability of the system just by cleaning the data out, I would argue. But then you've kind of got somewhere like, hey, we've just got some really big features in there. We're not very good at right sizing our features. So let's change the process so that we right size our features. Now we've got smaller, more focused features that are going through the system. And to some extent, now it's not a stable system because we've changed the system. But I don't think we're going to completely destabilize the system, but it's unstable in a positive way rather than in a negative way.
I think we're in violent agreement here. I really do. The only thing I'm saying is, just right before that step that you just said, the one thing I would do from an economic perspective, Stuart would say, from an economic perspective, you're best off looking at the data to see if there are those assignable causes and get rid of those first. Regardless of any other improvement things that you might be going after, get rid of those things first. Once you got rid of those things, then it's basically up to you to improve your process, right, however you see fit. And then, like you said, check the data and see if it did. So, And I guess what I'm looking for is
a nice simple number I can put against that. In the same way that cycle time is a number and throughput is a number, what's the what's the well, I suspect we're not going to come up with one, but that's kind of one of that's I guess that's what was prompting that tweet that kind of kicked off this conversation is, can we put a number against that we can report on to show that we're making a positive difference with our agile transformation work?
Can do you want to talk about ELO ratings, Prateek?
Oh,
do you want to talk about something else?
We've tried, so obviously Dan and I have tried multiple things with it, but I'm actually going to go back to probably something even simpler, which is how long does the customer expect things to take? And what's the difference between that and how long does their process tell us things will take? That probably is a better driver of what we're looking for, rather than.
You mean like a service level expectation?
A service level expectation.
Due date performance, maybe?
Yeah,
you're just going to start a shout. You're going to say flow efficiency here in a second, aren't you, Carl?
No. I might talk about flow load.
That's just rude. That's just rude.
But
no. I'm with you on flow load. I'm with you on flow efficiency. Although I might be a little bit more easy on flow efficiency, but not as an empirical measure. But yeah.
But I guess because what we are really talking about is comparing expectations of the customer to the performance of the process. So isn't that comparison what's more important? What's the difference between those two kind of more important?
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm. That's what I'm. It's almost like that's my definition of predictability.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Are those two voices in? Are they
yes.
in conjunction? Yeah, and this is. Dr. Wheeler said this. Dr. Donald Wheeler said this. I don't know if Stuart ever said it, but Dr. Wheeler, he talked about, getting the voice of the customer and the voice of the process in concert. The voice of the process, that's fairly objective. That's changing the process or whatever and collecting the data, as you're saying, Carl and adjusting. But getting the customer to change their expectations to be more in line with the voice of the process, that's political, right? At that point,
right.
I don't know that there's any hard and fast data that says, oh, we did a good job at changing our customers' expectation. You know what I mean?
And that's, and again, if I'm being brought in to help with an agile transformation, somehow just kind of going, oh, all I'm going to do is reset your expectation, feels like I'm cheating a little bit. There's an element of that. I agree, but I think we need to be, maybe meeting in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I keep falling back on the stable process thing. Of you cannot set an expectation for the customer, or you cannot cheat in that way if you don't have a stable process. Because you could set the expectation at 100 days, but guess what? Half a year later, it's gone up to 200 days.
Yeah. But I think the conversation is partly around step one is, well, let's understand what the capability of the current system is. Mm-hmm. So, hey, this is what you want, but I can show you the data says this is what you're going to get.
Right.
Okay. Now you're not happy with that. Okay. So how can we move in a direction that's going to make you happier? We may never, perfectly satisfy you because, everybody wants everything, yesterday.
Yep.
But we can probably move in a direction of your expectation, and I think that's what most organizations are looking for.
Absolutely. How we put a number on that, because I think that's what you're asking for earlier, Carl. Can we put a number on that, or what is that number? I don't know.
I mean, you're not going to put that absolute, but is there some kind of proxy that you can? I'm getting a no. All right.
No, I'm still getting. I have no idea.
The thing for me is, I don't think you can come up with a number just from the process. If we're talking about the expectation of the customer and the performance of the process, and you have these two things, you cannot just say that, hey, our predictability number is based only on the process. It's something.
Yeah. And all of these, I think all of these things are a conversation anyway. And yeah. It's all. I kind of like. I might be in one of the other products. You might have made a difference between reporting and analytics, and I think that's an important distinction to make. That there's reporting about, and I'm probably looking for a reporting number versus the analytics that we can do to help us figure out what we should be improving.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll have to find the reference, but there's a great quote, something along the lines of, it's so great that I don't even know exactly what it is, but it's something along the lines of, looking at reports is like trying to drive looking at your rearview mirror.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Whoever said that, I don't know who said that, or whatever. Whereas analytics, I think what you're talking about, Karl, it's supposed to be more proactive, more, talking about
looking at your dashboard. Yeah.
How are we going to improve? How are we going to improve this thing? How are we defining what improvement is? So,
yeah.
Wow, that's heavy. That's some heavy. It's a good thing we're drinking, because that's heavy stuff. I don't know if our answers have gotten better as we've been drinking more or not. I don't know.
Got livelier then, didn't we?
I mean, the one thing I wanted to, because the question I have, and I don't know if either of you can answer, is when I was talking about throughput being if it's too narrowly defined, saying it's a measure of productivity, because. And we talk about this a lot on the Kanban side. For those who are familiar with Kanban, we talk about this. It's about finding that right balance of effectiveness, efficiency, and predictability. However, we're defining those things, And so, yes, we can optimize for, or we can maximize for throughput, But have we hurt ourselves on some of these other things? Have we hurt ourselves on effectiveness? Have we hurt ourselves on some of these? So. I guess that's where I was going at in terms of.
Oh yeah, so and that's why I'm picking up on 3, which throughput, or productivity, responsiveness, and predictability.
Yeah.
But you've still got well, and actually, are we delivering value? And actually, are our people happy? Are we doing it in a way that treats our people humanely? And maybe you could put it under value, but maybe there's something around kind of customer satisfaction or something in there. Well, you've got quality in there as well, I guess. But yeah, there's the whole, I'll say it quietly, balanced scorecard that you could build around this.
Right.
But yeah, these things, there's trade-offs between them. Yeah, you go too far in one direction and you'll get a negative thing somewhere else.
But yeah, I mean, by and large, I don't really have a bunch of heartburn in terms of what you were saying. I don't know, Prateek, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say that even when we say productivity, like I think, Karl, you were trying to define it earlier, what productivity really means.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I go back to the old, manufacturing factory metaphor, a car factory's productivity is defined in how many cars they produce. So what's our equivalent of a car? It's a feature, probably, or maybe a release. But delivering more features, delivering more product, delivering more work, to me, that's it's a very simple one, but I think it's one that most people will kind of understand, that if we're delivering more work, and sometimes I'll kind of go for the same cost, but actually I don't even think for the same cost is necessarily an assumption. You could be more productive by putting more teams on the work,
or investing $1 billion,
investing in something or other, investing in your technology or something. But if you're delivering, if the team, the organization is delivering more value, to me, we're more productive.
Yeah.
Now, again, we could be delivering more stuff, but it's just taking forever. It takes us a year between start and finish. So that's when we want to be responsive, and that's where you start getting into the trade-offs.
Yeah, and this is where I think this becomes a topic for another episode. Is the for example, the car metaphor kind of for me starts to break down, because the customer problem you're solving by delivering a car is that someone can then travel without having issues. And that's the same customer problem over and over again. With the value that most, at least software teams, are delivering, a feature, even if it's exact same car, is solving different problems for different number of customers at different times. And that's where when we start measuring productivity by number of features and potentially by highest priority things done, I think again, that's a much whole different conversation.
Well, and that's why you need to be thinking about value and customer satisfaction as well separately. But for me, it's and quite often that's the first reaction is, but being productive doesn't mean you're delivering value. It's like, I agree, Let's not kind of become so value fetishist that everything has to relate to value in some ways. Like, we can tease these things apart and recognize that they're separate things. So yes, productivity for me is delivering more features, more work. Yes, that work needs to be high quality. It needs to be value. It needs to meet a customer need. All that stuff. We don't want feature factories that are just churning out features that nobody's using.
For sure, yeah. But I mean, and this gets back to the Ditka stuff, Prateek, right? I mean,
Exactly.
our best chance at delivering value anyway is going to be deliver as much stuff as we can, in the shortest period of time.
Yeah.
But whether we understand value
I just heard Karl say it's outputs over outcomes is what I heard.
And he's right, and he's absolutely right. If he said that, he's absolutely right.
Must be the whiskey talking.
There's been a lot. We've shoved a lot in this episode, but we reserve the right to bring you back, Karl. We need to have you back and finish.
All right. Well, you just figure out the answer to my question, and then I'll come back and you can tell me what the answer is. Educate me.
Is there a number for predictability? I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe I'll figure it out on my own, and I'll come back and tell you.
Yep.
Yeah, it's. Because the other thing, I don't know if you've ever asked your executives this, because this would be the question back to you. You don't have to answer it right here. But my experience with executives is they don't necessarily want more stuff faster. To your point, Karl, I think they just want confidence in a plan. That's when they think about predictability, that's really how they think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you say, hey, I'll give you less stuff, but we'll have more confidence in it, they'd probably take that over having more stuff, but less confidence, right? I mean, they'd probably, right? I mean,
to a degree, yeah. I mean, if I kind of went, oh yeah, well, I'll guarantee that we'll deliver you one feature this year.
Well, right. Yeah.
With really, so, but then, I mean, again, then you're into that whole conversation, which is a valuable conversation to have about different levels of confidence and how much confidence do you need, and how much risk are you prepared to take?
Right. And we haven't even talked about the risk dimension yet.
Yeah.
We got to have you back, Karl. We got to have you back for some of these things. If you want Karl back, please let us know in the comments below. We've got so much
You can answer yes or no.
Yeah.
Yeah. How confident are you that you want me back?
Right. We've got so much uncharted territory that we need to cover with Karl. But just want to say thanks so much for prompting these conversations and for bringing a different dimension and different perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was happy to disagree with you and
I know,
provoke you.
Who isn't? That's I know that's what the whole community's job is, right? They just know Dan's triggers and they're like,
exactly.
Just gotta throw them out there.
So what is the lead time for triggering Dan?
Yeah, I know you guys are DMing back and forth in the background.
Oh man, we should have been. Who's
going to piss Dan off today?
Yeah, tell him this.
All right. So for the star of the show in the background there, she's quieting down just a little bit, but it's time for her to go.
Yeah, definitely.
For Prateek Singh, special thank you to Karl for being here for this episode. Thanks so much. I hope you will take our invitation seriously and come back. And
I will.
For all of you out there, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.